She married a dying stranger for his last wish. Woke up as vampire queen with a 1,000-year contract. The hospice room smelled of antiseptic and ending things. Emma's hands trembled as she smoothed the wrinkled contract against her thigh, reading the same impossible words for the third time. $20,000 just to sit beside a dying man's bed and say I do. Enough to save her mother's house, pay the medical bills that had been drowning them both for 2 years, maybe even keep the electricity on through winter. The lawyer had been clear, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light as he'd explained. Mr. Corvinus has one final wish. A deathbed marriage. No consummation required. No expectations beyond the ceremony itself. The marriage will be annulled automatically upon his passing, which the doctors estimate will occur within 72 hours. You'll sign the certificate, speak the vows, and receive your payment. Nothing more. Emma had asked the obvious question. Why me? The lawyer's expression had been unreadable. You were selected from our agency's registry. Mr. Corvinus has very specific requirements. You meet them all. Now, standing outside room 1217, Emma wondered what those requirements could possibly be. She was nobody special. 26 years old. 2 years of community college she'd never finished, working double shifts at a diner that was always one bad month from closing. Her mother used to say Emma had kind eyes, but kindness didn't pay bills or cure cancer. The door opened before she could knock. A woman emerged, ancient and elegant, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than Emma made in 6 months. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes were the pale gray of winter mornings. She studied Emma the way museums studied paintings, looking for authenticity beneath layers of varnish. You're younger than I expected, the woman said, her accent unplaceable. European. Maybe. Centuries old in its precision. Emma swallowed hard. I'm 26. Is that a problem? The woman's lips curved slightly. No, child. It's perfect. She stepped aside. He's been waiting for you. The hospice room was nothing like Emma expected. Instead of sterile white walls and beeping machines, she found something closer to a palace chamber transported through time. Heavy curtains blocked the afternoon sun, casting everything in amber twilight. Candles burned in silver holders, their flames utterly still in the climate-controlled air. And in the center of it all, in a bed that looked hand-carved from dark wood, lay the man she was meant to marry. Emma's breath caught. The lawyer had said dying, had shown her a photo of a pale, gaunt face, but the man before her didn't look like he was fading. He looked like he was made of shadows and starlight, like something painted by old masters who understood that beauty could be terrible and mesmerizing all at once. His hair was dark as midnight, falling across a pillow that seemed too ordinary to hold such a face. His features were sharp, aristocratic, carved from marble that had learned to breathe. Even unconscious, even supposedly dying, he radiated a presence that made the air feel heavier, charged with something Emma couldn't name. Is he sleeping? Emma whispered. The elderly woman moved to the bedside, her movements fluid despite her apparent age. In a manner of speaking, she gestured to a chair positioned near the bed. Sit, child. We have much to discuss before the ceremony. Emma sat, unable to look away from the dying man's face. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, and she could see the flutter of pulse at his throat. Strange, for someone supposedly hours from death. What's his name? Dorian Corvinus, the woman replied, though he has borne many names across the centuries. Ruler of the Nightborn Court. First of the ancient line. Lord of Shadows and Keeper of the Eternal Covenant. Emma blinked. The what? The woman smiled, and for the first time Emma noticed how sharp her canines were. How very pointed and deliberate. You don't believe in vampires, do you, child? The laugh that escaped Emma's throat was half hysteria. This is a joke. Some kind of elaborate prank. She stood, backing toward the door. I'm leaving. I'm sorry, but this is insane. The woman moved faster than anything human should move. One moment she was by the bed, the next she was between Emma and the exit, her hand gentle but immovable on Emma's shoulder. "Peace, child. I know this is frightening. But you agreed to hear us out. $20,000 for 2 hours of your time, yes?" Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. "You said he was dying." "He is," the woman confirmed. Her expression softened into something almost like sorrow. "In 3 days the sun will rise on the winter solstice, and Dorian Corvinus will face his final death. Not because of age or illness, but because of a curse placed upon him 1,000 years ago. A curse that can only be broken by one thing." Emma's mouth was dry. "What thing?" "A willing bride," the woman said simply. "A human woman who enters the marriage contract of her own free will, asking nothing but mortal payment, expecting nothing but mortal outcomes. A woman who would marry a dying stranger for reasons of survival, not romance. For necessity, not love." The candles flickered, though there was no breeze. Emma found herself looking at the man in the bed again, at Dorian Corvinus, who was supposedly a 1,000-year-old vampire king facing his final death. He didn't look evil. He looked lonely. Even in unconscious sleep, he looked like someone who'd been waiting a very long time for something that might never come. "What happens if I say the vows?" Emma heard herself ask. The woman's smile was sad and knowing. "Then the curse breaks. Dorian will wake, and you will be bound to him by the ancient laws of our kind. Wed as his queen consort for a term of 1,000 years, unless death or dissolution frees you both." Emma laughed again, but this time it sounded hollow. 1,000 years. I'd be dead in 60 if I'm lucky. The woman's eyes held secrets older than Emma's family tree. "Would you?" "There are laws, child. Old laws written in blood and starlight. A vampire king's consort cannot die while the bond endures. You would become what we are. Immortal. Undying. Forever changed." The room spun. Emma gripped the chair's back, knuckles white. "You're telling me if I marry him, I become a vampire? For 1,000 years? That's insane. That's impossible. That's..." She couldn't finish. The words tangled in her throat with her heartbeat. The woman waited, patient as stone. Emma thought about her mother, wasting away in a hospital bed, drowning in bills Emma couldn't pay. Thought about the foreclosure notice taped to their door, the electricity company's final warning, the diner manager's sympathetic face when he'd had to cut her hours. $20,000 would fix everything, would buy time, buy hope, buy another year of her mother's smile. But this was madness. "I need to think," Emma whispered. The woman nodded. "You have 1 hour. Then Dorian must wake, or the curse completes its work." She moved to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. "For what it's worth, child, he chose you specifically. Researched hundreds of candidates, read countless files. He saw your photograph and said you had eyes that remembered kindness despite knowing cruelty. Eyes that had wept for others even while drowning yourself. He said you were exactly right." Then she was gone, leaving Emma alone with the impossible choice and the beautiful dying stranger who might be a vampire king. Emma sat in the chair beside Dorian Corvinus's bed, watching the candles burn down their wax lives, while her own life hung in balance. The elderly woman, who'd introduced herself as Madame Tesselin before leaving, had placed a folder on the side table. Emma reached for it now, hand still shaking, and opened it to find her own face staring back. The photograph was from her driver's license, 3 years old, taken on a day when she'd still believed things would get better. Beneath it, a dossier that made her stomach clench. Emma Catherine Reeves, age 26. Mother, Margaret Reeves, stage 4 lymphoma, currently receiving palliative care at St. Mercy Hospital. Estimated time remaining, 6 to 8 weeks. Father deceased, unknown causes. No siblings. No significant relationships. Employment, Paradise Diner. Average hours 32 per week. Wage $8.75 per hour. Debts totaling $73,000. Assets, none. Her entire life reduced to statistics and failures. Emma's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in this strange room that smelled of candles and secrets. They knew everything. Had researched her like a specimen, catalogued her desperation with clinical precision. The next page made her hands freeze. It was a contract, written in flowing script that looked hand-lettered by monks in ancient scriptoriums. She recognized some words, legal terminology mixed with phrases that sounded like poetry or prayer. Herein witness this covenant between Dorian Corvinus, first of the ancient line, Lord of the Nightborn Court, and Emma Catherine Reeves, mortal woman of no particular standing save that which matters most. Let it be known that this bond is entered freely, without coercion or enchantment, witnessed by the old laws and sealed by the moon's dark favor. The bride shall become queen consort, granted immortality and station befitting her role. The groom shall honor and protect, shall teach and guide, shall bind his fate to hers for the term agreed, 1,000 years unless sooner dissolved by mutual consent or death's final mercy. Should she accept, the mortal woman shall be transformed on the first full moon following the vows spoken. Should she refuse, no harm shall befall her, and payment shall still be rendered for her time and consideration. This is the way of the old laws. This is the covenant unbreakable. Emma read it 3 times. It still sounded impossible, still sounded like elaborate fantasy written by someone with too much money and too much imagination. Except Madame Tesselin had moved faster than human eyes could follow. Except the man in the bed looked like he'd been carved from dreams and shadows. Except Emma had learned the hard way that impossible just meant you hadn't seen it proven yet. She stood, moving closer to the bed. In the candlelight, Dorian Corvinus looked even more unreal. His skin was pale as moonlight on snow, smooth and flawless in a way that seemed painted rather than born. His eyelashes were dark crescents against high cheekbones, and his hands rested on his chest with fingers long and elegant. He wore a simple black shirt, silk or something finer, and Emma noticed that his chest barely moved with breath. As if breathing was optional, a habit rather than necessity. "You're really a vampire," she whispered to the unconscious man. "You're really dying, and you really think marrying me will break your curse?" No answer came. The candles burned their steady flames. Outside the room she heard the distant sounds of the hospice, nurses walking past, someone's television playing game shows, the elevator's soft ding. Normal things in a world that suddenly felt anything but normal. Emma thought about what immortality meant. 1,000 years. She tried to imagine it, and failed. Couldn't picture herself at 30, let alone 100, 500, 900. Would she stay 26 forever? Would she watch everyone she knew grow old and die? Her mother. Oh God, her mother. If Emma became immortal, she'd have to watch her mother die, would have to live centuries with that grief. But if she didn't take this deal, she'd watch her mother die anyway. Sooner. Harder. In pain that $20,000 might ease but couldn't cure. At least this way her mother would die knowing Emma was safe. Settled. Married to someone wealthy enough to keep her fed and housed, her mother wouldn't need to know about the vampire part, would never need to know that her daughter had sold 1,000 years for enough money to buy a few weeks of dignity. "I must be insane," Emma said aloud. "I'm actually considering this." She looked down at Dorian again, studied his face, trying to find cruelty or coldness there. But unconscious, vulnerable, he looked almost gentle, like someone who'd carried too many burdens for too long and had finally set them down. His jaw was strong. His mouth curved in a way that suggested he knew how to smile, even if he'd forgotten the practice. And there was something else, something in the set of his features that spoke of loneliness so deep it had worn grooves into his soul. Emma recognized it, because she carried the same weight. The loneliness of being the only one fighting. The only one who couldn't quit, the only one responsible for keeping another person alive when you could barely keep yourself breathing. "You chose me," she said softly, "because I understand, don't you? Because you knew I'd make the impossible choice. Because desperate people do desperate things." The door opened. Madame Tesselin entered, and Emma noticed for the first time how the woman's shadow didn't quite match her movements, how it seemed darker than shadows had any right to be, pooling around her feet like spilled ink. "Have you decided, child?" Emma's throat was tight. "If I say yes, what happens?" "Exactly." Step by step, Madame Tesselin moved to the opposite side of the bed. "We speak the vows. You sign the contract in the presence of witnesses. The old laws recognize the bond. Dorian wakes." She paused. "And then comes the difficult part. The transformation doesn't happen immediately. You'll have 30 days, until the first full moon after the vows are spoken. 30 days to settle your affairs, say your goodbyes, prepare yourself for what comes next. On the night of the full moon, you'll feel the change begin. It's not painless, I won't lie to you. But it passes, and when you wake, you'll be one of us." Emma's hands clenched. "What if I change my mind? In those 30 days?" "Then you walk away," Madame Tesselin said simply. "The bond breaks. Dorian returns to his cursed sleep. You keep the $20,000. No harm. No punishment. The old laws forbid coercion. This must be willing or it means nothing." That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made everything more real. They weren't trapping her. They were giving her genuine choice, which meant if she said yes, she couldn't blame anyone but herself. "What's he like?" Emma asked. "When he's awake? What kind of person is he?" Madame Tesselin's expression softened into something almost like affection. "Lonely," she said. "Honorable to a fault. He carries the weight of our entire court on his shoulders, and has done so for longer than most nations have existed." She looked down at Dorian with obvious care. "He's forgotten how to be anything but king. Forgotten that even immortals need connection, companionship, someone who sees them as more than their crown and responsibilities. He thinks this marriage is purely transactional, that you'll be a political necessity, nothing more." Emma heard the unspoken words. "But you think different." Madame Tesselin smiled. "I think Dorian chose you because something in your eyes called to something in his soul. I think the old laws are wiser than we know, and I think 1,000 years is a very long time to spend with someone you can't stand." She extended her hand. "But that's for you to discover. The question remains, will you marry him?" Emma looked at the contract, at the unconscious vampire king, at her own trembling hands. She thought about her mother's smile, about bills paid and dignity preserved, about impossible choices that weren't really choices at all. She thought about loneliness and desperation, and two people who understood what it meant to sacrifice everything for responsibility. "Yes," Emma whispered. "I'll marry him." The ceremony happened at midnight. Madame Tesselin had explained that vampire contracts required darkness and specific celestial alignments. Emma suspected it was more about drama than actual magical necessity, but she'd already agreed to marry an unconscious vampire king, so she'd lost the right to question theatrical choices. The hospice room had been transformed. Someone, probably multiple someones moving with inhuman speed, had brought in an altar of black marble veined with silver. Candles surrounded it in concentric circles, their flames casting dancing shadows across walls now draped in midnight blue silk. The medical equipment had vanished, replaced by furniture that looked stolen from Gothic cathedrals. And there were witnesses. A dozen figures stood in the shadows, their faces obscured by hoods, but their presence undeniable. Emma could feel their eyes on her, assessing, judging, weighing her worth against whatever standards vampires used. Her hands smoothed down the dress Madame Tesselin had provided. It was beautiful. Far more beautiful than anything Emma had ever worn. Deep burgundy velvet that fit her perfectly, as if tailored specifically for her body. The neckline was modest but elegant, the sleeves long and fitted. She looked like someone who belonged in oil paintings and candlelit ceremonies, looked like someone who could be a queen. She felt like a fraud. Madame Tesselin appeared at her elbow holding a small box. This was Dorian's mother's, she said quietly, opening it to reveal a ring. White gold or platinum, impossibly delicate, set with a stone that caught the candlelight and fractured it into rainbow shards. Not a diamond. Something older, stranger. A moonstone, perhaps, or something that only existed in vampire vaults. It's beautiful, Emma breathed. It will recognize you, Madame Tesselin said, which seemed like a strange thing to say about jewelry. She took Emma's hand, her skin cool and dry. Are you ready? No, Emma admitted, but I don't think I ever will be. Then we proceed. 2 vampires, male and ancient, carried Dorian to the altar. They moved with reverent care, positioning him so he stood upright between them, his body supported, but appearing to stand of his own volition. His eyes remained closed. His breathing shallow. He looked like a beautiful corpse prepared for viewing, and Emma's stomach twisted at the wrongness of it. I'm marrying a man who can't even stand on his own, she thought. This is insane. But she stepped forward anyway. Madame Tesselin took her position at the altar's head. The hooded witnesses formed a semicircle, their hands clasped in prayer or expectation. The candlelight seemed to pulse with rhythm matching Emma's heartbeat. We gather under the dark moon's favor, Madame Tesselin began, her voice taking on a resonance that made the air vibrate. To witness the forging of a bond older than crowns, stronger than death. To see 2 souls joined by the old laws, bound by choice, freely given. She looked at Emma. Do you, Emma Catherine Reeves, mortal woman born of earth and sunlight, come to this covenant willingly? Without coercion or enchantment? I do, Emma said. Her voice didn't shake. Small miracle. Do you accept the terms as written? The transformation? The responsibilities? The 1,000 years of binding? I do. Do you take Dorian Corvinus as your husband, your king, your partner in all things until death or dissolution frees you both? Emma looked at the unconscious man, at his beautiful still face, at the loneliness that clung to him like winter frost. I do. Madame Tesselin turned to Dorian. The 2 vampires holding him leaned close, and one whispered something in a language Emma didn't recognize. Ancient syllables that sounded like wind through dead trees. And then, impossibly, Dorian's lips moved. The words were barely audible, spoken in that same ancient tongue, but Madame Tesselin nodded as if he'd shouted. He consents, she translated. Speaks the vows in the old way, as is his right. She lifted the contract, now written on parchment that looked medieval. Both of you, place your hands upon the covenant. Emma laid her right hand on the document. The vampires guided Dorian's hand to rest beside hers. His skin was cool, almost cold, but not unpleasant, like touching marble that had been kept in shadow. Madame Tesselin produced a small knife, ceremonial and ornate. The old laws require blood to seal what words begin, she explained. A single drop from each. Before Emma could process that, Madame Tesselin had pricked her finger. Pain bloomed sharp and quick, and a dark red bead of blood welled up. The vampire woman guided Emma's hand, letting the drop fall onto the parchment between their names. It sizzled where it landed, not with heat but with something else. Energy. Magic. Impossible things becoming real. Then Dorian's hand. Another prick. Another drop. His blood was darker than Emma's, almost black in the candlelight. When it hit the parchment, the entire document flared with light. silver and gold and colors Emma had no names for. The witnesses gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind through a canyon. The light spread from the contract to their joined hands, traveling up Emma's arm in traceries that felt like lightning made gentle. She wanted to pull away but couldn't move, could only watch as the light wrapped around both of them, binding them in visible threads of power. By blood given and vows spoken, Madame Tesselin's voice rose above the light's humming. By the old laws witnessed, and the dark moon's blessing, I pronounce you bound, husband and wife, king and consort. Let no law of man or vampire break what is joined here. The light exploded outward. Emma cried out, not in pain but in shock. It felt like diving into cold water, like surfacing from a dream, like waking up in a body that was hers but somehow more. She could feel everything. The candle flame's heat despite being feet away, the stone floor's vibration from footsteps, the whisper of silk against skin. And more, she could feel something vast and ancient and utterly foreign in her chest, like a second heartbeat that wasn't hers. Could feel Dorian Corvinus's presence like a star burning in her peripheral awareness. When the light faded, Emma staggered. Madame Tesselin caught her, steadying her with gentle hands. Peace, child. The bond is strong. You'll adjust. Emma barely heard her, because Dorian's eyes were opening, slowly, like someone surfacing from depths no light had ever touched. His irises were silver. True silver, metallic and gleaming like polished coins. They focused on Emma's face with an intensity that made her breath catch. The vampires supporting him stepped back. Dorian stood on his own, no longer needing their help. He stood tall and strong and utterly present in a way he hadn't been unconscious. Power radiated from him like heat from summer pavement. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant and carried traces of a dozen accents, as if he'd learned language from too many places to settle on one. You came, he said. Simply, wonderingly. I didn't truly believe you would come. Emma found her voice. I signed a contract. Dorian's expression flickered, something that might have been disappointment. Yes. Of course. The contract. He looked down at their hands still joined on the altar, at the ring that had appeared on Emma's finger, the moonstone gleaming, then back to her face. Thank you, he said formally, for what you've done. For breaking the curse. You'll be well compensated, I assure you. All terms will be honored. It shouldn't have stung. This was a transaction. She'd known that, but somehow hearing him reduce it to business after that impossible light, after feeling his presence burning in her chest like a second soul, made Emma's throat tight. You're welcome, she managed. Dorian stepped back, properly looking at her for the first time. His gaze traveled from her face down the burgundy dress and back up. His expression remained carefully neutral. You're younger than I expected. Emma lifted her chin. I'm 26. Is that a problem? No. He seemed to struggle for words. You're just different. From what I imagined. Before Emma could ask what he'd imagined, Madame Tesselin interrupted. The ceremony is complete. The witnesses confirm the bond's validity. She looked at Dorian. How do you feel, my lord? Restored, Dorian said. He flexed his hands, rolled his shoulders. The curse is broken. I can feel the old laws settling back into proper order. He looked at the assembled vampires. Thank you all for witnessing. You may return to the court. Report that King Corvinus lives. The hooded figures bowed and filed out with supernatural silence. Within moments, only Emma, Dorian, and Madame Tesselin remained. The silence stretched awkward and strange. Now what? Emma finally asked. Now, Dorian said, still looking at her with those unsettling silver eyes. We go home. Home turned out to be a mansion that made the hospice room's transformation look understated. The car ride had been silent, Emma sitting in the back of a vehicle that cost more than her mother's house, watching the city lights blur past while trying to process that she'd just married a vampire king and could feel his presence humming in her bones like a constant low frequency. The mansion rose from manicured grounds like something out of Gothic novels. All stone towers and leaded windows and architecture that predated electricity by centuries. Inside was worse. Better. Emma couldn't decide. Every surface gleamed with wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Marble floors polished to mirrors. Tapestries that belonged in museums. Furniture that looked hand-carved by masters long dead. And silence, the kind of heavy silence that came from spaces too large for the people inhabiting them. Madame Tesselin led them through corridors that seemed to multiply. "This is the East Wing," she explained. "Your private quarters, my lady." Emma nearly laughed at the title. She'd been a diner waitress 6 hours ago. Now she was my lady, living in a mansion, married to a vampire king. The absurdity threatened to choke her. The quarters were a suite of rooms bigger than the apartment Emma shared with her mother. Bedroom with a canopy bed carved from dark wood. Sitting room with fireplace and bookshelves reaching the ceiling. Bathroom with a tub that could fit 4 people. Dressing room with empty wardrobes waiting to be filled. Everything was beautiful. Everything was expensive. Everything felt like a museum exhibit rather than a home. "Your belongings will be retrieved tomorrow," Madame Tesselin said. "For tonight we've provided essentials." She gestured to the dresser. "The full moon is 28 days hence. Until then, you remain human. You'll eat, sleep, and exist as you always have. We ask only that you stay on the grounds. For safety." "Whose safety?" Emma asked. "Yours," Dorian answered from the doorway. His voice made her jump. She'd forgotten how silently vampires moved. "The court will need time to accept a human queen consort. Not all will be pleased. Some may see you as weakness." Vulnerability. He stepped into the room, and Emma noticed he'd changed clothes. Now he wore dark slacks and a shirt the color of charcoal. Simple, but perfectly tailored. Until the transformation completes, you could be hurt. Killed, even. I won't allow that. Emma wrapped her arms around herself. "So I'm a prisoner." "A guest," Dorian corrected. "Free to go anywhere on the grounds, the library, the gardens, the observatory. Simply not beyond the gates. It's temporary. 30 days. She wanted to argue. Wanted to demand her freedom and independence, but she'd signed the contract. Had taken his money. Her mother's hospital bills were already being paid. The house's foreclosure notice already rescinded. Emma had sold her freedom fair and square. "Fine," she said. "Anything else I should know?" Dorian and Madame Tesselin exchanged glances. "You'll meet the court tomorrow," Madame Tesselin said carefully. "They'll want to see the woman who broke their king's curse. Be prepared for questions. Scrutiny. Perhaps some hostility." Emma laughed, hollow and sharp. "Can't wait." "I'll leave you to rest," Madame Tesselin said. "Ring if you need anything." She touched a bell pull by the door, showed Emma how it worked, then swept out with inhuman grace, leaving Emma alone with her new husband. The silence stretched thin and uncomfortable. Dorian stood near the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, staring into flames that hadn't been lit when they'd entered, but now burned steady and warm. Magic. Probably. Everything here was probably magic. "You don't have to stay," Emma said quietly. "I know this is just a contract. You don't have to pretend." Dorian's hand tightened on the marble. "I'm not pretending. You're my wife now. My consort. There are expectations. Responsibilities. Not tonight," Emma said firmly. "Tonight, I need to be alone. Process everything. Figure out how my life turned into a Gothic novel." Something that might have been hurt flickered across Dorian's face. But he nodded. "As you wish." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Emma." She looked up. His silver eyes were softer now, less metallic, more like moonlight on still water. "I know this isn't what you would have chosen. Know you did this for money, not for me. But I swear on the old laws I will honor the contract. You'll be protected, provided for. You'll want for nothing material. It was probably meant to be reassuring. Instead, it made Emma feel hollow, like she'd traded her humanity for luxury and safety, like some fairy tale that ended badly. "Thank you," she whispered. Dorian left. The door closed with a soft click. Emma stood in the center of her beautiful prison, surrounded by wealth she'd never dreamed of having, wearing a dress that cost more than she used to make in a month. The ring on her finger gleamed, impossibly delicate. She could still feel Dorian in her chest, that strange second heartbeat that told her exactly where he was in the mansion, moving away, giving her space. She should feel grateful. Instead, she felt utterly alone. Emma moved to the window. The ground stretched out below, gardens and fountains and pathways illuminated by cunningly placed lights. Beautiful. Sterile. Perfect. In the distance, she saw figures moving. Vampires, probably. Court members. People who would judge her, test her, find her wanting. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. What have I done? No answer came. Just the crackling of the magical fire and the weight of 1,000 years pressing down on her shoulders. Emma pulled out her phone, intending to call her mother, to hear a familiar voice, to ground herself in something real. But it was past midnight. Her mother would be asleep, medicated and peaceful. And what would Emma say anyway? "Hi, Mom. I married a vampire king for money. Don't worry, I'll be immortal soon. How's the chemo?" She set the phone down, changed out of the beautiful dress into the nightgown someone had left on the bed. Silk, of course. Probably cost more than her car. The bed was enormous and comfortable and utterly foreign. Emma lay in the center of it, staring at the canopy above, and tried to cry. But tears wouldn't come. She'd gone too far past tears into some numb space where emotions couldn't quite reach. Instead, she focused on that strange awareness in her chest. On Dorian's presence somewhere in the mansion. Was he sleeping? Did vampires sleep? Did he regret choosing her? She'd seen the disappointment when he'd realized she was there for money, not romance. Had he hoped for something different? Some fairy tale bride who'd fallen in love with him sight unseen? The thought was ridiculous. He was 1,000 years old. Probably forgot more love stories than Emma had ever read. This was business, a curse broken, a contract fulfilled. Nothing more. So why did his formal distance hurt? Emma rolled onto her side, pulling silk sheets up to her chin. Tomorrow she'd face the court. 27 days after that, she'd transform into something inhuman. But tonight, she was still Emma Reeves. Still mortal. Still terrified. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tried not to think about silver eyes and loneliness that recognized her own. Tried not to wonder if 1,000 years with a stranger who felt familiar could possibly be survivable. The mansion settled around her with creaks and whispers. Old places had their own language. Emma was beginning to suspect she'd have to learn it, along with everything else about being a vampire queen, if she survived that long. Emma woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to curtain and a breakfast tray that had appeared on the bedside table while she'd slept. Silver covers over warm food, fresh juice in crystal, and a note in elegant handwriting. The court gathers at noon. Dress accordingly. Madame Tessaline will assist. She sat up, disoriented by silk sheets and unfamiliar luxury. For a moment she'd forgotten where she was. Then the ring on her finger caught the light, and reality crashed back. Vampire queen. Contract marriage. 30 days until transformation. Right. The food was incredible. Eggs cooked perfectly, pastries that melted on her tongue, fruit so fresh it must have been picked this morning. Emma ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her stomach tight with anxiety. Meeting the court, being scrutinized by ancient vampires who probably thought a human queen consort was an insult. This would go great. Madame Tesselin arrived precisely at 10. She swept into the room with an armful of garments, her expression all business. "We have 2 hours," she announced. "Enough time to make you presentable." Emma bristled. "I can dress myself." "Not for vampire court, you can't," Madame Tesselin said bluntly. "There are rules. Expectations. Colors that signify rank. Jewelry that indicates house affiliation. One wrong choice, and you'll insult someone powerful enough to make your remaining mortal days extremely unpleasant." She laid out the dresses. "Now, bath first." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of preparation that made Emma feel like a doll being dressed for display. The bath was scented with oils that smelled of night-blooming flowers. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that required more pins than seemed structurally necessary. Makeup was applied with artistic precision, emphasizing her eyes and cheekbones. And the dress. Deep emerald silk that hugged her waist and flowed to the floor in elegant folds. The neckline was modest, but the back was open, showing pale skin that looked vulnerable and deliberate. Silver embroidery traced patterns Emma didn't recognize but suspected meant something to those who could read them. Jewelry came next. Earrings set with emeralds. A necklace of silver links so delicate they looked like spider silk but felt strong as steel. And a circlet, actual circlet, thin band of white gold that rested on her forehead, marking her as royalty. "I look ridiculous," Emma said, staring at her reflection. "I look like I'm playing dress-up." "You look like a queen," Madame Tesselin corrected, "which is exactly what you need to be." She met Emma's eyes in the mirror. "Listen carefully. The court will test you. They'll ask questions designed to embarrass or trap you. They'll watch for weakness, for fear. You cannot show them either." Emma's hands clenched. "I'm terrified." "Then be terrified behind your teeth," Madame Tesselin said sharply. "Lift your chin. Meet their eyes. Remember that you broke a 1,000-year curse that none of them could break. You have value. Power. Don't let them make you forget it." The word struck something in Emma, some spark of defiance that had gotten buried under desperation and poverty. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, met her own eyes in the mirror and saw someone who'd survived worse than vampire judgment. "All right," she said. "Let's do this." The throne room was designed to intimidate, vaulted ceilings that soared into shadows, walls lined with tapestries showing battles and coronations and moments of glory. At the far end, 2 thrones carved from black stone veined with silver. And everywhere, vampires. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. They lined the walls in groups, clustered by houses or alliances Emma couldn't parse. All of them turned to watch as she entered. All of them went utterly silent. Emma's heels clicked on marble floors. The sound echoed like gunshots. She kept her chin up, kept her pace steady, kept her eyes forward even though she could feel their gazes like physical weight. Madame Tesselin walked beside her, a steadying presence. At the throne, Dorian waited. He stood rather than sat, dressed in formal attire that made him look every inch the ancient king. Black coat with silver embroidery that matched her own. High collar. No crown. But he didn't need one. Power radiated from him like gravity from a planet. His silver eyes found hers. Something flickered there. Approval, maybe. Or relief. Emma couldn't tell. She reached the dice. Madame Tesselin stepped aside. Dorian descended 2 steps, extended his hand. Emma took it. His skin was cool and steady, and the bond in her chest flared warm. Together they climbed to the thrones. She sat beside him, fighting the urge to fidget. The court remained standing, waiting. Dorian's voice filled the space without needing to shout. Members of the Nightborn Court. Witnesses to the old laws. I present to you Emma Corvinus, My wife and queen consort. She who broke the curse that bound me for 10 centuries. She who entered the covenant willingly and will stand beside me for 1,000 years. A murmur ran through the assembled vampires. Not quite approval, not quite dissent, just acknowledgement. Emma felt their eyes cataloging every detail. Human. So young. Did she know what she agreed to? Can she possibly survive? The whispers crawled over her skin. A figure stepped forward from the crowd. Male, ancient, with white hair and eyes like chips of ice. "Your Majesty," he said, voice dripping with false courtesy. "While we rejoice at your restoration, surely the court deserves explanation. What qualities does this human possess that warranted such elevation?" Dorian's expression didn't change. "She possesses my choice. That is explanation enough." The vampire smiled, sharp and dangerous. "Of course, sire. But the old laws do specify that a queen consort must meet certain requirements: strength, wisdom, the ability to withstand our nature. Has she been tested?" "Not yet," Dorian admitted. "She will be, when the transformation completes." The vampire's gaze shifted to Emma. "And if she fails? If she cannot adapt to our ways? Then the bond dissolves," Dorian said flatly, "as the contract stipulates. But I have no doubt of her strength." Emma's heart hammered. She had significant doubt, significant terror, but she kept her face neutral, remembering Madame Tesselin's words. "Be terrified behind your teeth." Another vampire stepped forward, this one female, beautiful in the way statues were beautiful. Cold and perfect. "Your Majesty, if I may, what skills does your consort bring to our court? What value beyond curse-breaking?" The question was a trap. Emma could feel it. Whatever she said would be judged insufficient. Before Dorian could answer, Emma spoke. "I bring a mortal perspective." The words came out steadier than she felt. "I've lived with death breathing down my neck, with bills I couldn't pay and choices that had no good outcomes. I understand desperation. Survival. The kind of hunger that's not for blood but for hope." The female vampire's eyebrows rose. "And this qualifies you to be queen?" Emma met her eyes. "You've all lived so long, you've forgotten what it means to die. To be fragile. To know every day might be your last." She looked around the room. "I haven't forgotten. And if I'm going to be immortal, if I'm going to stand beside your king for centuries, maybe that's exactly what this court needs. Someone who remembers what it costs to be mortal. Someone who won't take eternity for granted." Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed. Not mockery. Something that sounded almost like respect. The white-haired vampire inclined his head. "Perhaps there's more to you than first appearances suggest." "We shall see." He melted back into the crowd. Others followed, the intensity of their scrutiny easing slightly. Dorian stood, and the court's attention snapped back to him. "The formal presentation is complete," he announced. "Those with business may approach the throne. Those without, you are dismissed until the evening assembly." The crowd began to disperse, though Emma noticed many lingering, watching. Clearly they'd hoped for more drama. More spectacle. A few vampires did approach. Minor nobility with petitions and requests. Dorian handled them with practiced efficiency, his voice measured and authoritative. Emma sat beside him, trying to look queenly while having no idea what she was doing. One vampire, younger looking than the others though probably still centuries old, bowed to them both. "Your Majesties, I bring greetings from the southern houses. They wish to extend congratulations on your marriage and request audience within the month." Dorian's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tell the southern houses their request is acknowledged. We will send word when schedules permit." The vampire bowed again and retreated. Emma leaned slightly toward Dorian. "Problem?" "Politics," he murmured. "The southern houses have been pushing for more representation in the central court. They'll use any excuse to petition for meetings. Don't worry about it." But Emma noticed the tension in his shoulders. The way his hand gripped the throne's arm just slightly too hard. This was more than simple politics. When the last petitioner left, Dorian stood. "Come. I'll show you the grounds." They walked through gardens that looked cultivated by artists, rather than gardeners. Every hedge trimmed to geometric perfection. Every flower bed arranged in patterns that probably had symbolic meaning Emma didn't understand. Fountains burbled with water that caught sunlight and threw it in rainbow arcs. It should have been beautiful. It was beautiful. But it felt sterile, like a painting of a garden rather than a living thing. "You handled the court well," Dorian said as they walked. "Better than I expected." Emma glanced at him. "You expected me to fail?" "I expected you to be terrified." His silver eyes found hers. "You were terrified. I could smell it. But you didn't show it. That takes courage." The compliment warmed something in Emma's chest. The bond pulsed gently, and she wondered if he could feel her reactions the way she felt his presence. "I've had practice hiding fear," she said. "You don't survive poverty by showing weakness." Dorian was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about your life. Before the contract." "What?" Emma stopped walking. "Why?" "Because you're my wife," Dorian said simply. "Because we have 1,000 years ahead of us. Because I chose you from hundreds of candidates, and I'd like to know why you agreed." Emma looked away. "You know why." "Money. My mother's. Medical bills. The contract said you researched me. You know everything." "I know statistics," Dorian corrected. "I know your debts and employment history. I don't know you. There's a difference." They reached a bench beside a fountain. Dorian sat, gestured for Emma to join him. She did, leaving space between them that felt both necessary and lonely. "My father left when I was 8, Emma said finally. "Mom never talked about why. We managed okay for a while. She worked 2 jobs. I helped where I could. Then I was 24, and she got diagnosed. Stage 4 lymphoma. The medical bills started piling up. I dropped out of community college to work full-time. Wasn't enough." She stared at the fountain's water. "I was drowning. Watching her die and knowing I couldn't stop it, couldn't even make it easier. When your lawyer showed up with the contract offer, it felt like a lifeline. Even if it was insane." Dorian listened, without interrupting. When she finished, he said quietly, "Your mother. How much time does she have?" 6 to 8 weeks. Emma whispered. The doctors were clear. "It's palliative now, not curative. Do you want to see her? Before the transformation?" Emma's head snapped up. "Can I?" "You said I couldn't leave the grounds." "I said you couldn't leave unsupervised," Dorian corrected. "But I can take you. Tomorrow, if you'd like. We'll visit the hospital. You can explain whatever you think appropriate about your new circumstances." The offer cracked something in Emma's chest. Tears pricked her eyes. "Why would you do that?" "Because even contractual marriages should have some compassion," Dorian said. "And because I know what it's like to lose a parent. To wish for more time." Emma wiped at her eyes, trying to maintain composure. "Thank you. That means more than you know." They sat in silence for a while. The fountain burbled. Somewhere in the gardens, birds sang. Finally, Emma asked, "What was your curse? How did it happen?" Dorian's expression went distant. "A mistake. 1,000 years ago, I loved someone I shouldn't have. A human woman. The court forbade the marriage. Said it would weaken our bloodline, disgrace our house. I defied them. Married her anyway." Emma's breath caught. "What happened?" "The court's high priestess cursed me," Dorian said flatly. "Said if I wanted to marry a human so badly, I'd sleep until another human agreed to marry me of her own free will, expecting nothing but mortal rewards. The curse would last 1,000 years or until it was broken, whichever came first." His jaw tightened. "My wife. My first wife," She died while I slept. Grew old and passed away within the first century. I never got to say goodbye. Emma's heart twisted. I'm sorry. Dorian shrugged, but the gesture was anything but casual. It was a long time ago. But it taught me that defying the old laws has consequences, and that love, even immortal love, can be fragile. Is that why you made this contract marriage? Emma asked. Because you won't risk loving again? Dorian met her eyes. I made this contract because I was tired of sleeping, tired of waiting, tired of being trapped in a punishment for caring too much. He stood. And I chose you, because when I saw your photograph, I saw someone who understood sacrifice. Someone who'd chosen survival over pride. I thought we might understand each other. Emma stood too. Do we? Understand each other? I think we might, Dorian said, given time. They walked back toward the mansion in companionable silence. Emma's mind raced with everything she'd learned. Dorian had loved before, had been punished for it, had lost his wife to time while cursed. And now he was bound to Emma for 1,000 years in a marriage based on transaction rather than feeling. She should feel guilty, should feel like a poor replacement for his lost love. But instead, she felt something else. Hope. Maybe that two people who understood loss and loneliness might find something resembling partnership, even if it wasn't love. Inside the mansion, Madame Tesselin waited. My lord, my lady, the evening assembly begins in 3 hours. You'll both need to prepare. More court politics? Emma asked. Dorian's expression was unreadable. The formal announcement of our marriage to the extended houses. It will be tedious, but necessary. He looked at Emma. You can rest beforehand if you'd like. Emma shook her head. I'd rather stay busy. Is there a library you mentioned? This way, Dorian said. The library was magnificent. 3 stories of shelves packed with books in every language Emma recognized and many she didn't. Leather-bound volumes that looked medieval. Modern hardcovers. Scrolls in glass cases. The smell of old paper and knowledge filled the air like incense. Emma's fingers itched to touch everything. This is incredible, she breathed. It's yours now, Dorian said. Everything in this house. Everything I have. The contract makes it so. Emma turned to him. I don't want your things. I want. She stopped. Wasn't sure what she wanted. Dorian stepped closer. What do you want, Emma? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Emma thought about her answer. What did she want from this impossible situation? Not wealth, though security was nice. Not immortality, though she'd accepted it. What then? I want to matter, she said finally. I want these 1,000 years to mean something. I don't want to be just a contract. Just a cure for your curse. I want to be a person. A partner. Someone you chose, not just someone who met requirements. Dorian's silver eyes softened. You already are, he said quietly. You already are. The evening assembly was everything the afternoon court session had been, amplified and multiplied. More vampires, more scrutiny, more elaborate ceremonies that Emma barely followed. She stood beside Dorian on the dais, wearing yet another formal gown, this one midnight blue with silver threading that caught candlelight like captured stars. The crown, an actual crown this time, rested on her head with enough weight to remind her constantly of her new position. Speeches were made in languages Emma didn't speak. Toasts were offered in goblets filled with blood, wine, or some mixture Emma tried not to think about. She sipped from her own glass, human wine, and tried to look composed while internally screaming. Hours passed. Her feet ached. The crown felt heavier with each minute. But she kept her spine straight, her expression neutral, her chin lifted exactly as Madame Tesselin had taught her. When a particularly ancient vampire droned on about old law precedents, Emma felt Dorian's hand cover hers on the throne's arm. A brief touch. There and gone. But it steadied her. Reminded her she wasn't alone in this performance. Finally, mercifully, the assembly ended. The crowd dispersed with formal bows and carefully neutral expressions. Emma sagged in her throne the moment the doors closed. That was torture, she muttered. Dorian's lips twitched. That was Tuesday. Welcome to immortal politics. Emma groaned. Are they all like this? Worse, usually, Dorian said. Tonight was abbreviated because you're still mortal. They made concessions. When you're transformed, the assemblies will run past dawn. Emma's eyes widened. How do you stand it? Centuries of practice, Dorian admitted, and remembering that keeping the houses unified prevents war. Tedious politics are preferable to bloodshed. He stood, offered his hand. Come, you've earned rest. They walked through corridors lit by candles that never seemed to burn down. Magic? Emma had stopped questioning it. Everything here was impossible. Might as well accept it. At her suite's door, Dorian paused. Tomorrow. The hospital visit. We should leave by noon. Your mother's visiting hours begin at 2. Emma nodded. Thank you. Again. For arranging it. Dorian's expression was unreadable. You'll transform in 27 days. After that, seeing her will be complicated. The bloodlust takes time to control. It's better to say goodbye while you're still fully human. The words hit like ice water. Goodbye. Right, because after the transformation, Emma wouldn't be able to visit safely, wouldn't be able to hold her mother's hand without risking losing control. The reality of what she'd agreed to crashed down fresh and terrible. Dorian must have seen something in her face because his voice gentled. I know it's difficult, but you'll still be you. Changed, yes, but yourself. And your mother will be cared for. The best hospice care money can buy. Pain management, dignity, whatever she needs. I promise. Emma's throat was tight. She's all I have. I know, Dorian said, which is why I'll make sure she has everything. Even after you can't be there. He hesitated, then added, I lost my mother a very long time ago. I remember how it felt. How it still feels sometimes. You don't forget that kind of loss. But you do learn to carry it. Emma wiped at her eyes. Very inspiring. Really selling the immortality here. Dorian's lips curved slightly. I'm told my bedside manner needs work. That surprised a laugh out of Emma. Wet and shaky but real. Yeah, definitely needs work. They stood in the corridor, neither moving to leave. The bond hummed between them. Comfortable now. Familiar. Emma could feel Dorian's presence like a second heartbeat, could sense his uncertainty matching her own. Should I stay? Dorian asked quietly. Just to talk, if you'd rather not be alone. The offer was careful, no pressure, no expectation, just genuine concern. Emma considered. Part of her wanted solitude to process everything, but a larger part didn't want to be alone with her thoughts. Didn't want to spiral into panic about transformations and dying mothers and 1,000-year contracts. Okay, she said. Yes. Stay. They ended up in her sitting room, Emma curled in an armchair while Dorian took the sofa. The fireplace crackled with magical flames. Someone had left tea and small cakes on a tray. Emma suspected Madame Tesselin had anticipated everything, as usual. Tell me about the vampire world, Emma said. Not the politics. The real stuff. What's it actually like being immortal? Dorian considered. It's strange. You'd think having unlimited time would make things easier. But it doesn't. If anything, it makes choices harder when you know you'll live to see consequences play out across centuries. Every decision feels weighted. Emma sipped her tea. Do you get bored? All the time, Dorian admitted. Imagine reading every book, seeing every place, learning every skill. Eventually, novelty becomes difficult to find. That's why so many old vampires become obsessed with politics or power. It's one of the few things that stays unpredictable. What about relationships? Emma asked. Friendships? Complicated, Dorian said. Mortal friends age and die. You watch them grow old while you stay frozen. After a while, you start keeping distance. It hurts less. And other vampires? Don't they age either? We don't age, Dorian confirmed. But we do change. Slowly. Across centuries. Sometimes you find yourself growing apart from people you've known for 500 years because you've both shifted in subtle ways that compound over time. He looked into the fire. Immortality is lonely. That's the truth nobody tells you. Emma thought about that, about watching the world change. Everyone you love dying. Centuries of loneliness stretching ahead. Is that why you agreed to the contract marriage? She asked. Because you were lonely? Dorian was quiet for a long moment. Partially, but also because I was tired of being controlled by the curse, tired of sleeping through decades while the world moved on. When I woke for brief periods, I'd find everything changed, buildings gone. Languages evolved. People I knew long dead. He met her eyes. I wanted to be present. To live my life. Even if it meant sharing it with a stranger. We don't have to be strangers, Emma said. We could try being friends. Dorian's expression softened. I'd like that. They talked for hours. Dorian told her about the vampire houses, the complex alliances and ancient feuds. Emma shared stories about her mother, about growing up poor, but loved, about dreams she'd had before medical bills consumed everything. Somewhere around midnight, Emma yawned. Dorian noticed. You should sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult. Emma didn't want him to leave. The conversation had been easy, comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. But she was exhausted, emotionally and physically wrung out. Will you tell me more tomorrow? About the vampire world? If you'd like, Dorian said. He stood. Good night, Emma. Good night. At the door, Dorian paused. Emma. She looked up. You did well today. At the assemblies, you have strength the court will come to respect. Maybe even fear. Emma smiled. Is that a compliment? From a vampire king? It's a fact, Dorian said. But yes, also a compliment. He left. Emma changed into the silk nightgown, climbed into the enormous bed and lay staring at the canopy. In 27 days she'd transform into a vampire. Would become something inhuman. Would live for 1,000 years bound to a man she barely knew. The thought should terrify her. Did terrify her. But underneath the fear, something else stirred. Curiosity. Hope, the sense that maybe, just maybe, this impossible situation might become something resembling a life worth living. Emma closed her eyes and felt for the bond. Found Dorian's presence somewhere in the mansion. Steady. Solid. There. She fell asleep feeling less alone than she had in years. The hospital smelled exactly as Emma remembered. Antiseptic and illness. Hope and despair mixed together in air that recycled through too many lungs. She walked beside Dorian through corridors painted cheerful colors that fooled no one, past rooms where families kept vigil beside dying loved ones, toward the palliative care wing where her mother had been moved 3 weeks ago. Dorian had glamored himself, he'd explained, a vampire trick that made humans see what the vampire wanted them to see. To the hospital staff, he appeared as Emma's ordinary human fiancé rather than an immortal king with silver eyes and supernatural presence. The illusion was so perfect Emma sometimes forgot it wasn't real. Room 407. Emma's steps slowed. Dorian's hand found hers, squeezed gently. I'll wait outside, give you privacy. Emma shook her head. Come in. Please. I want her to meet you, to know I'm not alone. Margaret Reeves looked smaller than Emma remembered. The cancer had stolen weight and color, leaving behind a woman who seemed made of paper and determination. But her eyes, when Emma entered, still sparkled with the fierce love that had kept Emma breathing through the worst years. Baby girl, Margaret breathed. Her voice was weak but warm. I was hoping you'd come today. Emma crossed to the bed, took her mother's hand. The skin was thin as tissue, bones prominent beneath. Hi, Mom. I brought someone. She gestured Dorian forward. This is Dorian. My. She hesitated. Husband, we got married. Margaret's eyes widened. Married? When? Her gaze shifted to Dorian, assessing with maternal precision despite her weakness. "Are you good to her?" "I'm trying to be," Dorian said. His voice had gentled, lost its regal authority. He sounded almost human. "Your daughter is remarkable, Mrs. Reeves. Strong and kind. I'm fortunate she agreed to marry me." Margaret studied him longer. Emma recognized the look. Her mother had always been able to read people, see through pretense to truth beneath. Finally, she nodded. "You love her." Dorian hesitated. The glamour couldn't hide the flicker of surprise on his face. "It's complicated," he said carefully. "But I care for her welfare. I promise she'll be protected and provided for." "That's not what I asked," Margaret said. "But it's enough for now." She turned back to Emma. "Tell me everything. How did you meet? Why so sudden?" Emma had prepared a story. Met through friends, whirlwind romance, decided to elope. Simple. Normal. But sitting beside her mother's deathbed, lies felt wrong. She looked at Dorian. He nodded, understanding somehow. "Mom," Emma said carefully, "I need to tell you something strange. Very strange. And I need you to trust me." Margaret's expression sharpened. "You're pregnant." "No," Emma said quickly. "Nothing like that." She took a breath. "Dorian isn't human, he's a vampire. And I married him to break a curse. In 26 days I'll transform and become immortal." The words hung in the antiseptic air. Margaret stared, blinked, then impossibly, smiled. "Well," Margaret said, "that explains why he moves like water and has eyes like coins." I wondered. Emma's jaw dropped. "You? What? You believe me?" "Honey, I'm dying," Margaret said. "I've got maybe a month left. You think I haven't seen strange things in this hospital? The woman 3 doors down says angels visit her. The man across the hall insists his dead wife brings him flowers. Who am I to say what's real?" Her grip on Emma's hand tightened. "Are you safe? Does he treat you well?" "Yes," Emma said. "The contract is binding. He can't hurt me. And he's been." She glanced at Dorian. "Kind. Generous." Margaret's gaze shifted back to Dorian. "You'll take care of her? After I'm gone?" "I will," Dorian said. "On my honor and the old laws. She'll want for nothing." "Will she be happy?" The question caught them both off guard. Dorian's expression flickered. "I hope so. I'll try to ensure it." Margaret nodded slowly. Good enough. She sagged back against pillows, the brief burst of energy fading. "Emma." "Baby. Come here." Emma leaned close. Her mother's hand touched her cheek, impossibly gentle. "I'm proud of you. Always have been. You've carried so much for so long." She smiled, tears tracking down hollowed cheeks. "Maybe immortality is the universe's way of saying you've earned a break." "Mom," Emma whispered, "I don't want to leave you." "I know," Margaret said. "But you're going to anyway. Because that's what we do. We let go when we have to." She looked at Dorian again. "Promise me something." "Of course," Dorian said. "Don't let her forget how to be human," Margaret said. "Even when she's not anymore. Don't let her lose the kindness that makes her who she is. Immortality sounds lonely. Make sure she doesn't face it alone." Dorian's throat worked. "I promise." They stayed for 2 hours. Emma told her mother edited versions of the mansion, the court, the impossible luxury. Margaret drifted in and out of sleep, but each time she woke, her eyes found Emma with relief and love. Finally, a nurse entered. "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Reeves needs rest. You can come back tomorrow." Emma stood reluctantly. Dorian touched her shoulder. "I'll give you a moment." He stepped into the hall. Emma leaned over her mother. "Mom. I love you so much." "I love you too, baby," Margaret whispered. "Live your 1,000 years well. Make them count. Don't waste them grieving me." "I'll try," Emma said, "though we both know I'll grieve anyway." Margaret smiled. "That's my girl, stubborn even about mourning." She squeezed Emma's hand. Go on now. Your vampire king is waiting. Emma kissed her mother's forehead. Walked out of room 407. Collapsed into Dorian's arms in the hallway, sobbing against his chest while nurses pretended not to notice. He held her steady, one hand cradling her head, murmuring words in languages she didn't understand, but that sounded like comfort anyway. In the car ride home, Emma stared out the window at the passing city. I have 26 days, she said. 26 days to say goodbye. It's not enough. It's never enough, Dorian agreed. But it's what we have. Emma looked at him. Did you get to say goodbye? To your first wife? No, Dorian said quietly. The curse took me suddenly. One day I was planning our future. The next I was waking a century later to news that she'd died decades ago. Alone. The pain in his voice was raw despite the centuries between. Emma reached across the seat, took his hand. Their fingers intertwined. The bond pulsed warm. I'm sorry, she said. For your loss. For the curse stealing your time with her. Thank you, Dorian said. He didn't let go of her hand for the rest of the drive. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings in the library, where Emma devoured books about vampire history and law. Afternoons learning court etiquette from Madame Tesselin, who drilled her on proper forms of address and complex political hierarchies. Evenings with Dorian, sometimes at formal gatherings. Sometimes just the two of them talking in the observatory or walking the gardens, and every other day, visits to the hospital. Watching her mother fade by increments. Margaret Reeves declined steadily. Each visit showed new weakness, new pain barely masked by medication. But she remained lucid, present, determined to spend every remaining moment truly alive. On day 15, Emma brought photographs, showed her mother pictures of the mansion, the gardens, her rooms. Margaret traced the images with trembling fingers. You look happy here, she observed, happier than I've seen you in years. I'm adjusting, Emma admitted. It's strange, terrifying sometimes. But Dorian is. She searched for words. He's a good man, even if he's not technically a man anymore. He cares for you, Margaret said. I can see it. The way he looks at you when you're not watching. Emma's heart stuttered. He looks at me? Like he's afraid you'll disappear, Margaret said. Like you're precious. Breakable. Like he's forgotten how to be gentle, but he's trying to remember for you. That night, Emma paid more attention. Noticed the way Dorian's eyes tracked her across rooms. How he positioned himself between her and other vampires without seeming to move. How his hand would reach toward her before he caught himself and pulled back. He was trying not to care, she realized. Trying to keep this transaction business. But something was shifting between them despite his efforts. Despite her own. On day 20, Margaret couldn't leave her bed. Emma held her hand and told stories. Memories of childhood, of better days before illness and poverty had consumed everything. Dorian waited in the hall, giving them privacy. But through the bond, Emma felt his steady presence. Anchor in rising grief. You should go, Margaret whispered. It was late, visiting hours long over. The nurses had made exceptions. I don't want to, Emma said. Mom, I can't. I know, baby. Her mother's eyes were bright with unshed tears. But I need you to be strong now. Need you to let go before the transformation. You can't be here after. Not safely. I know, Emma whispered. Dorian had explained it carefully. New vampires couldn't control bloodlust, couldn't be around humans, especially sick ones whose blood called to predatory instincts. After the transformation, Emma wouldn't be able to visit for months, maybe years. Her mother would be gone by then. This is goodbye, Emma said. The words cracked. This is our last time. Margaret pulled her close with strength that shouldn't have existed in her wasted body. You listen to me, Emma Catherine Reeves. You're going to live 1,000 years. You're going to see wonders I can't imagine. You're going to be strong and fierce and remarkable. She held Emma's face between shaking hands. And you're going to carry my love every step. I'll be with you, always. Emma sobbed. Can't watch you go. Yes, you can, Margaret said firmly. Because you're my daughter. And we survive. That's what we do. They held each other until nurses finally insisted Emma leave. In the hallway, Dorian stood waiting. He took one look at Emma's face and pulled her into his arms. She's dying, Emma choked out, in the next few days. And I can't be there. Can't say goodbye. I know, Dorian said. His hand stroked her hair. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. They drove home in silence. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She paced her rooms, the bond thrumming with agitation. Around midnight, a knock sounded. Dorian stood in the doorway wearing simple dark clothes, hair disheveled as if he'd been running hands through it. Can I come in? Emma nodded. He entered, and they stood facing each other in the firelight. I can't stop thinking about her dying alone, Emma whispered. About how I won't be there. Won't hold her hand. She'll be scared and in pain, and I'll be here becoming a monster. You're not a monster, Dorian said firmly. You're surviving. There's a difference. Doesn't feel like it. Dorian moved closer. Emma, look at me. She met his silver eyes. Your mother asked me to promise you wouldn't face immortality alone, he said. I intend to keep that promise. You won't be alone in this. Not in the transformation, not in the grief, not in the 1,000 years after. I swear it. Something in Emma broke. She closed the distance between them. Buried her face in his chest. Dorian's arms came around her immediately, solid and steady. They stood like that for a long time. Eventually, Emma pulled back enough to see his face. Why are you being so kind? This is supposed to be a contract. Business. It was, Dorian said quietly. It was supposed to be simple. Break the curse, fulfill obligations, maintain distance, but then you walked into that hospital room and introduced me to your dying mother with such fierce love in your eyes. And you asked about my lost wife with genuine compassion. And you stood before the court and spoke about remembering mortality like it was a gift rather than weakness. His hand came up to cup her cheek. You're not what I expected, Emma Corvinus. You're so much more. Emma's breath caught. Dorian. I know it's too soon, he said. No, we barely know each other. But I need you to understand, this isn't just a contract anymore. Not for me. Maybe it never was. Emma searched his face. What are you saying? I'm saying I care about you. Dorian said, as more than a wife in name. As more than a solution to a curse. I'm saying I want these 1,000 years to be real. Partnership. Friendship. Maybe eventually something more if you're willing. Emma's heart hammered. The bond between them flared bright and warm. I'm willing, she whispered. I think I've been willing since you held my hand in the car. Since you promised to protect my mother. Since you sat with me and talked about loneliness like you understood. Dorian's thumb traced her cheekbone. May I kiss you? It's technically our wedding night. We're absurdly overdue. Emma laughed despite her tears. Yes. Please. The kiss was gentle. Tentative. Two people learning each other through touch. Dorian's lips were cool but not cold, soft despite his supernatural nature. He kissed her like she was precious, like he'd been waiting centuries for exactly this. When they pulled apart, Emma rested her forehead against his. Stay tonight? Just. Hold me. I don't want to be alone. I'm not leaving, Dorian promised. They lay together on Emma's bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms. Emma's head rested on Dorian's chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. Tomorrow her mother would likely die. In 6 days Emma would transform into something inhuman. But tonight, she had this. Warmth and comfort, and the beginning of something that felt like love. It would have to be enough. Margaret Reeves died 3 days later. Emma wasn't there. Couldn't be there. The hospital called at dawn. Dorian took the phone from Emma's shaking hands, spoke quietly with the nurse, made arrangements for everything. Emma sat on her bed and felt the world tilt. Grief crashed over her in waves. Her mother was gone. The woman who'd raised her, protected her, loved her unconditionally. Gone while Emma was safe in a mansion learning to be a vampire queen. The funeral was small. Emma wore black and stood beside Dorian in a cemetery that smelled of earth and roses. A handful of her mother's friends attended, nurses from the hospital, the diner manager where Emma used to work. They looked at Dorian with curiosity and slight suspicion, this wealthy stranger who'd married Emma so suddenly. But they offered condolences and shared memories. Told Emma that Margaret had been proud of her, had talked constantly about her daughter finding happiness. Emma stood at the grave afterward, staring at the headstone. Margaret Ann Reeves, beloved mother. She had lived and loved fiercely. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered to the turned earth. "Sorry I wasn't there. Sorry I chose immortality over your last days. I hope you understand. I hope you'd forgive me." Dorian's hand found hers. "She would," he said quietly. "She did. She told you to live those 1,000 years well, to make them count." Emma leaned into him. "How do I do that? How do I make her death mean something?" "By living fully," Dorian said. "By not wasting the time she wanted you to have. By being the fierce, kind woman she raised you to be. By remembering that grief and love can coexist. That mourning someone means they mattered. They stood together until the sun began to set. Then drove home in silence heavy with loss. The transformation came 3 days later. Emma woke on the morning of the full moon feeling strange. Her skin tingled. Her senses sharpened. She could hear conversations 3 floors below. Smell individual ingredients in the breakfast tray someone had left outside her door. Dorian appeared at noon. "Tonight," he said. "Are you ready?" "No," Emma admitted, "but I don't think ready is possible." He smiled slightly. "Probably not." He led her to a room she'd never seen. Deep in the mansion's lower levels, past doors that required keys and passwords, inside was a chamber carved from stone, furnished simply with a bed and heavy curtains. "This is where you'll transform," Dorian explained. "The room is warded, soundproofed. You'll be safe here." "Safe from what?" "From hurting anyone," Dorian said gently. "The transformation involves pain. Screaming, sometimes violence as the body fights what's happening. You'll need to be contained." Emma's throat tightened. "Will you stay?" Dorian hesitated. "It's not usual. Traditionally, the newly transformed are left alone." Emma met his eyes. "I don't care about tradition. I need you, please." "Then I'll stay," Dorian said. "Every moment." Madame Tesselin arrived at sunset. She carried a goblet filled with dark liquid. "This will ease the transition," she explained. "Make it faster, less agonizing." Emma took it with shaking hands. "What is it?" "My blood," Dorian said. "Freely given. Willingly offered. It will bind our covenant more deeply." "Tie your transformation to me specifically." Emma looked between them. "And if I drink it, you'll wake as my true consort," Dorian said. "Bound not just by contract but by blood. Our connection will be permanent. Absolute. You'll feel what I feel. Sense what I sense. We'll be linked across any distance." "It's a choice," Madame Tesselin said quickly. "Not required. You can transform without it. But it will be more painful. Take longer. And the bond will remain purely contractual." Emma thought about the past weeks. About Dorian holding her through grief. About conversations in libraries and gentle kisses. About promises to face immortality together. She lifted the goblet. To partnership, she said. To whatever we're becoming. To us, Dorian agreed. Emma drank. The blood was thick and strange, tasting of copper and darkness and something indefinable. Power. Maybe. Or destiny. She drained the goblet. The full moon rose. Emma felt it like a string pulled taut in her chest. Then the pain began. It started as ache in her bones, deepening to grinding agony as her body began to change. She collapsed onto the bed, every nerve screaming. Dorian was there instantly, holding her hands. His voice in her ear. "You're strong. You can survive this." Emma couldn't answer, could only scream as her bones restructured, as her senses exploded into overwhelming input, as humanity burned away like fog in sunlight. Hours passed. Days. Time lost meaning in the pain. But through it all, Dorian's presence anchored her. His hands holding hers, his voice steady and calm, his blood singing in her veins, remaking her from the inside out. Finally, mercifully, the pain receded. Emma surfaced like a drowning person finding air. Her eyes open. The world had changed. Colors were brighter. Sounds were layered symphonies. She could smell Dorian's skin, the stone walls, dust particles and air currents, could hear his heartbeat in her own, now slower, stronger, synchronized. Her hand came up, skin pale as moonlight, fingers tipped with nails that had grown sharp. She could feel strength coiled in her muscles, power humming in her blood. "I'm a vampire," she whispered. Dorian smiled. "You're my queen." Emma sat up. The movement was fluid, effortless. She felt different, changed, but also fundamentally herself. Just sharper, stronger, more. "How do you feel?" Dorian asked. "Like I could tear down mountains," Emma said, "or dance on clouds, or run forever. Is this normal?" "The euphoria fades," Dorian warned. "But the strength remains." He helped her stand. "Come, look." A mirror hung on the far wall. Emma approached it cautiously. The woman looking back was familiar but transformed. Same face, same features, but perfected. Skin flawless, eyes bright and clear, irises ringed with silver like Dorian's, hair glossy and thick. She looked like an idealized version of herself, like what she might have been if life hadn't been hard. "I'm beautiful," Emma breathed. "You always were," Dorian said. "Now you can see it." Emma turned to him, saw him with new eyes. His presence was overwhelming now, power radiating like heat. But also something else. The bond between them had deepened into something profound. She could feel his relief that she'd survived, his joy at her transformation, his affection warming into something deeper. "You love me," Emma said, realizing it fully for the first time. Dorian's expression softened. "I'm beginning to." "Yes." Emma stepped closer, reached up to cup his face. "I'm beginning to love you too." The kiss was different now. Vampire to vampire, equals in power and immortality. No longer fragile human and careful monster. They could be honest, passionate, real. When they pulled apart, Dorian rested his forehead against hers. "Welcome to eternity, Emma Corvinus. Welcome home." The first year was adjustment. Learning to control bloodlust, to move with supernatural speed without destroying everything she touched, to navigate vampire politics with the sharpened instincts of her new nature. Emma threw herself into learning, devoured texts on vampire law and history, trained with weapons masters who taught her to fight with the enhanced strength she now possessed, attended endless court sessions where she gradually earned respect through sharp questions and sharper observations. Dorian guided her through everything, patient when she struggled, proud when she succeeded. Their partnership deepened into genuine marriage. Affection became love. Love became devotion. They learned each other's rhythms. Dorian discovered Emma's dry humor and fierce loyalty. Emma discovered Dorian's hidden gentleness and the loneliness he'd carried for centuries. They shared blood and secrets, and the kind of intimacy that came from truly being seen by another person. The bond between them thrummed constantly, warm and sure. Emma could sense Dorian anywhere in the mansion. could feel his emotions bleeding through into her own awareness. It should have been invasive. Instead, it felt like belonging. She visited her mother's grave regularly, brought flowers and talked to the headstone about her new life, about the vampire queen she was becoming, about the husband she'd married for money but kept for love. Sometimes Dorian came with her, stood silently while Emma processed grief that would last centuries. Other times, he gave her space, understood she needed to mourn alone. 5 years in, Emma proposed changes to court law, modernizations that would allow humans and vampires to interact more freely. The old guard resisted. But Emma had learned political maneuvering, had allies in younger houses tired of ancient restrictions. The votes were close. But she won. Dorian signed the new laws with visible pride. 10 years in, Emma stood on the mansion's balcony watching sunset paint the sky crimson and gold. She'd been a vampire for a decade, had barely begun her 1,000-year contract. But immortality no longer felt like a curse. It felt like possibility. Dorian found her there, wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Emma leaned into him. "About how scared I was when we married. How certain this would be miserable. And now? Now I'm grateful," Emma said. Turned to face him. "For the curse that brought me here. For the contract that bound us. For every moment we've shared. Even the hard ones." Dorian kissed her forehead. "I'm grateful too. For a human woman desperate enough to marry a dying stranger. For eyes that remembered kindness despite knowing cruelty. For you, Emma. Always you." Emma smiled. "We have 990 years left. What should we do with them?" "Everything," Dorian said. "Anything." He took her hand. "We could travel, see the world properly. I could show you Rome at night, Tokyo's cherry blossoms, the northern lights from frozen tundra. We could build hospitals, use our wealth to help people like your mother. People who need miracles but can only afford desperation." Emma's heart swelled. "Yes, all of that." Dorian's expression grew more serious. "Or we could expand the court. Create true partnership between humans and vampires. You've already started that work. We could finish it. Make the world different. Better." Emma thought about it. About her mother's wish that she live these 1,000 years well. Make them count. "I want to do all of it," she decided. "Every impossible thing. I want to see the world and change it. I want to help people and build something lasting. I want to spend 990 years being useful, being present. Making this life mean something." "Then we will," Dorian promised. Together. They stood on the balcony as stars emerged. The bond between them pulsed steady and strong. Emma thought about the terrified woman who'd signed a contract in a hospice room. About the desperate choice that had led her here. She'd married a dying stranger for money. Had woken as a vampire queen bound for 1,000 years. It should have been a tragedy. Should have been selling her soul for survival. But standing beside Dorian with eternity stretching ahead, Emma realized she'd gotten the better end of the bargain. She'd lost her mortality, lost the ability to see her mother grow old beside her, lost the simple life she'd known. But she'd gained purpose, power, partnership with someone who understood loneliness and chose connection anyway. She'd gained 1,000 years to make her mother proud, 990 years left. Emma could work with that, could build something magnificent from the ashes of her mortal life. Could prove that desperate choices sometimes led to unexpected grace. The night deepened around them. Somewhere in the mansion, Madame Tessalin was probably managing household affairs with her usual quiet competence. Court members were likely scheming and plotting in their elegant ways. The world kept turning, kept changing, kept offering new challenges and possibilities. And Emma Corvinus, former waitress, current vampire queen, stood beside her king and felt ready for all of it. The contract had specified 1,000 years. But looking at Dorian now, feeling the bond singing between them, Emma suspected the real binding had nothing to do with legal documents. They'd chosen each other, day by day, moment by moment, across all the small intimacies that built genuine love. The 1,000 years was just a starting point. What came after would be up to them. Forever is a long time, Emma said softly. Yes, Dorian agreed. His hand tightened on hers. But I find I'm looking forward to it. Emma smiled. Me too. They walked back into the mansion together. Behind them, the stars wheeled through ancient patterns. Ahead, 1,000 years waited to be lived. And Emma Corvinus, who'd once married a dying stranger for money and woken as an immortal queen, was ready to make every single year count.